All right, I'm just going to say hello to all of our audience. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to introduce the team from Great Eastern Ranges. We've got Executive Director Gary Howling, who'll be running the session. And I just want to quickly do an acknowledgement of country. So Biolinks Alliance is proud to acknowledge the traditional owners of the places where we live and work. We recognise and respect the enduring relationships they have with their lands and water, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and future. Gary, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Sasha, and welcome everybody. We're lucky last, the final session for the day, and I'd like to welcome you all to a discussion, a Q&A about Glideways, a program that's being managed and led by the Great Eastern Range Initiative, but couldn't be making the kind of headway that it's making without the fantastic work that practitioners are doing on the ground. As Sasha said, I'm Gary Howling, Executive Director with the Great Eastern Range Initiative, an initiative that kicked off in 2007 to bring people together to restore and reconnect healthy habitats along a 3,000 kilometre landscape from Western Victoria, far north Queensland. The purpose of this session is to give you an insight into some of the experience of various of the partners that have been involved in the Great Eastern Range Initiative, that have been involved in particular in projects as part of a Glideways program, but also involved in general Glido activities over the years. Glideways was launched by GR in 2015 as a direct response to both the threats that we recognised were impacting on gliders on a local level throughout the ranges, as well as a recognition that because gliders of all varieties occur across large areas of the Great Eastern Ranges, the scale of the response that we'll need to undertake to conserve them is going to involve working beyond the traditional scope of individual conservation projects, but working on projects that are linked across multiple landscapes, undertaking activities that are related and complementary across multiple landscapes. So Glideways comprises of a suite of projects that have been undertaken by various groups from Central Victoria through currently into Central Queensland. And I'm really pleased and proud to be joined today by several of my colleagues from partner organisations involved in the Great Eastern Range Initiative to join me as part of a Q&A session. In a moment, I'll introduce them or get them to introduce themselves, but just like to acknowledge their contribution and thank them in advance for being involved in this conversation today. Also, I'd like to thank Central Victorian Biolinks in particular for hosting this symposium. Great Eastern Ranges Initiative has been really pleased and proud to be able to support the symposium as we did 4 years ago with a previous symposium. So yeah, really excited to be able to share some of those experiences with you and with our partners today. What we'll do now is we've got partners from several organisations from Central Victoria through to the Sunshine Coast. I'll just go around the table and ask them to each introduce themselves, just say who they are, what organisation they work for, and also what landscapes that they've been working in. So we'll go from south to north. And if I may, I'll just start off with Sophie.
Thanks, Gary. So I'm the Executive Director of the Biolinks Alliance, who's obviously you all come to know through this event. We've been working with, from the start, well, the start of Glideways, we've been working with the Great Eastern Ranges on the project. 4 years ago, we held a symposium on this very topic, a face-to-face one. Those were the days we could all meet face-to-face. And it really was sort of bringing together scientists like we are today, but all the various community groups through Central Victoria, extending over from the Grampians over through to Benalla in the Alps, who are interested or already doing glider work. And that was a really great event in sort of for everyone getting to know what everyone was doing, raising some of the key issues that we should be focusing on in the conservation of these species. And it stimulated, I guess, or the beginnings of Glideways in Central Victoria. And Glideways in Central Victoria has continued through that time, so over the last 4 years, as a series of, I guess, projects that are either being, sort of augmented or brought together through, I guess, the role that Biolinks plays as a connector and a capacity builder. And yeah, there's various citizen science projects. There's intention to do more detailed local area planning on the best sort of strategic actions to take in particular landscapes around greater gliders and squirrel gliders and associated other arboreal marsupials. And yeah, and our role is to support those projects, to connect them together, bring in the science, bring in the partnerships that are needed to make them happen. Yeah, so it's been a great initiative, and we really hope through this symposium to be building on the foundations that have already been laid for that Glideways.
Thank you for that, Sophie. And I'll move us along further to the north and just ask Mary Benet to please just briefly introduce yourself and the landscape you're working in.
Hi, Gary. Yeah, nice to be here. Yeah, so I am working on the Kanangra Boy to Angler Link partnership, which basically extends from the Greater Blue Mountains and takes in sort of Kanangra Boy National Park and Wombeyan Caves, following the Abercrombie River through to the Wyangler Dam near Cowra. So we've been working there since we sort of formed in about 2011, 2012. And in sort of about 2015, we'd done some great work through that through the partnership, but we decided we needed a bit more of something for people to focus on, and so we sort of came up like working with the Great Eastern Ranges on the Glideways program. So we decided to sort of make the glider the sort of flagship species, I guess, for our conservation area. And we then, we didn't actually have a lot of records of gliders in the area. We, just had a few sort of, random records of squirrel gliders and, but not a lot of others. And so we started doing we set up some sort of long-term monitoring sites. And yeah, we've since then been able to, find out a lot more about the glider species we have in the area, and we've been able to secure some funding to keep the program going. We have sort of incorporated through Glideways into a whole lot of education programs, citizen science, and I think it has really helped bring the community along with us. So yeah,
excellent. Thanks for that, Mary. And then over the other side of the dividing range in the Illawarra, David Rush.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, everyone. So I work across the Illawarra Shoalhaven region from Wollongong down to Batemans Bay area, and currently coordinate two New South Wales Environmental Trust Bush Connect projects. One is called the Biolinks Bushlinks project, the other one called the Thickening the Thin Green Line of the Illawarra Escarpment, or just Thin Green Line for short. I'm also a regional assessor and conduct land for wildlife assessments across that region. Arboreal mammal research is being conducted in both the Berry Bushlinks and Thin Green Line project areas via collaborative postgraduate and PhD research work with the University of Wollongong under the supervision of Dr. Katerina Mikak. The focus of this work has been on the greater glider, but also includes other gliders, sugar gliders, feathertail gliders, and ground-dwelling mammals, including bush rats, antechinus, bandicoots, as they're the common prey species for foxes, which we're also concerned about in the project areas. In 2014, Gary Daly conducted a study of greater gliders at 7 Mile Beach National Park. There's an isolated population there. And this led to his submission to the New South Wales Scientific Committee to have that population listed as an endangered population in New South Wales. The population was isolated due to a lack of connectivity in the landscape due to previous land clearing for agriculture, and more recently threats of rural residential sand mining and resort developments. Also some threats which included road widening and tree clearing, which was conducted by Shoalhaven City Council. The There's been a few studies on some of the greater gliders through the university, a study by Simon Vincent and others on the current estimates and vegetation preferences of an endangered population of the vulnerable greater glider at 7 Mile Beach National Park. That's soon to be published in Austral Ecology. There's also another study also by Vincent and others on the thermal cameras as a survey method for Australian arboreal mammals with a focus on the greater glider. That was published in Australian Mammalogy earlier this year in March 2020. Anna Graysonen is a PhD student at Wollongong Uni and is currently carrying out research titled Expanding Greater Glider Habitat Use Through the Use of Rear Entry Nest Boxes. And so we figured that the research that has been conducted here has highlighted that the gliders were observed in greater numbers in Eucalyptus pilularis, blackbutt dominated forests in this part of the region. And as expected, that suitable nesting hollows was an important factor affecting their distribution. The findings
Excellent.
Yep, okay, that enough?
Well, we might delve into some of those issues in a little bit more detail as we're going through the Q&A session this morning. But thank you very much for that, Dave. A really rich variety of activities happening in your part of the world. We'll take a bit of a leapfrog across the rest of New South Wales up into southeast Queensland, and where we're being joined by Sue Brischke.
Hello, thanks Gary. Hello everyone. Yes, my name's Sue and I work with Susie Duncan. I'm the project officer for Hinterland Bushlinks. Hinterland Bushlinks is basically a connectivity project and we aim to stitch up the fragmented landscape in the Sunshine Coast hinterland mainly, but our area goes north to Gympie and Kilkheven. It goes out west to Nanango and south to Kilcoy and Caboolture. And it also takes in the coastal plain and sort of leapfrogs over the ranges. So mostly our work is done in the Blackall Range area. We have ventured up to Gympie and currently we're assisting a little group out near Moore who are looking after a tiny little reserve in the Somerset region. Our area takes in the catchments of the Mary River and the Brisbane River, the lower catchment of the Noosa River and the entire catchments of the Malula, Maroochy and Stanley rivers. So we do a fair bit of work in riparian sort of zones and work closely with the Mary River Catchment Care Coordinating Group and the Lake Baroon Catchment Care Group. So we're working with those catchment care groups. We became involved in the Glideways project with GER, I think was it 2015, Gary, or 2016? Correct, yes, because it fitted nicely with the work we do. One of the projects, I guess one of our main projects is we support landholders in the area with revegetation or restoration projects that they're doing on their own land. And we also do some work on public lands. So we work, I won't say closely, but we certainly have a partnership with the Sunshine Coast Council, who own a number of reserves in our council area. And their conservation partnerships officers are invaluable in helping us connect with landowners and just get into the nitty-gritty of what's about. In terms of gliders in our area, sugar gliders are widespread and moderately abundant. Squirrel gliders are less abundant and they're more commonly found on the coastal plain where their habitat is impacted with land clearing and housing developments and things like that. The greater gliders and yellow-bellied gliders are found in the Blackall Range and the Conondale ranges, and they're in the older growth habitat, which is limited due to historical land clearing and logging. And so one of the things that Hinterland Bushlinks has been lobbying for is connecting up some of the little tiny national parks with the more intact Conondale National Park to create a new enlarged Yabba National Park. and we've put in a proposal to the government, and we're waiting to hopefully hear a positive response to that, that they'll announce that that's going ahead. But because we're coming up to an election, that will be a little bit dependent on the outcome of the election, I guess. And the other thing that I'd like to say just now is the Queensland Glider Network is hosted by Wildlife Queensland, and they involve the community in reporting observations of the greater and yellow-bellied gliders and monitoring the populations. They mostly work in the Greater Brisbane, Logan, Ipswich and Moreton Bay council areas. And there's some work starting in North Queensland in mahogany gliders.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yep.
Thanks ever so much for that, Sue. So thanks everybody for a really rich and varied introduction. I'm sure that's already going to start causing a few questions in people's minds, but what we might do for the next few minutes is just to kick the conversation along. I've got a few questions that I wanted to pose just to tease out a few of those points that you've already made, each of you. But rest of those attending, if you'd like to raise a question, please do so. I've got the chat menu bar up in front of me as well. So if there's anybody particularly I'd like to ask a question to, please feel free to direct it and to indicate who you'd like the question to. Otherwise, start peppering us with questions. But we might go back. Obviously, you talked to some extent there, Sue, about the variety of glider species in your landscape. Mary, we've learned a lot over the years about the different varieties of gliders within the Kanangra Boyd to Wyangler landscape that you're working in. It's a landscape that stretches from the Blue Mountains out to the inland woodlands of the Central West Slopes. Over the last 5 years, could you tell us a little bit about the work that you've been involved in doing to get a better understanding of the gliders in the landscape and get a better understanding about what your partnership needs to be doing through Glideways to be able to support their conservation?
Yes, Gary. So yeah, as I mentioned, when we first started, we actually wasn't a lot of records around gliders in our partnership area. And what we have discovered, so we have established 5 study areas where we have set up long-term monitoring sites. And we have discovered that we actually have very good population of greater gliders, particularly in the eastern edge of the K2W area, like surrounding the Blue Mountains National Park, but also extending down in some of the reserves with deeper gullies and things like that down towards the bigger area. So that's been very positive results from our surveys. Unfortunately, a lot of the area for the greater glider was burnt in the recent fires. So we're actually going back out again next month to do the follow-up surveys there. But hopefully, knowing that they extend well into the corridor, that there is that chance, even if we have lost a lot, that they will be able to come back and recolonize in the area when it's ready. We also have discovered some discrete populations of squirrel gliders, which are sort of also further to the western edge, and we've just started a Saving Our Species project there, establishing it as a priority landscape area. So we'll be hopefully we get some good results there. I just got a text from it. We have worked with Peter and Judy Smith, and they've just out there, just arrived at Biggar, ready to start the surveys there. So we'll be doing a variety of things there, with also using camera traps to sort of get some positive ID.
Yep. Okay. So we've had an immediate response to that. A quick follow-up question. The long-term monitoring you mentioned, are you doing that as part of a scientific survey, or are you with universities, or are you using a citizen science approach?
No, we have so 2 ecologists, Peter and Judy Smith, who work on our work for the partnership, and they established that. We do involve, well, at the moment it's not really practical to have too many volunteers out working with them. I mean, we do involve volunteers in it, but it is done through experienced ecologists.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, now another of the long-standing landscapes that's been involved in doing a variety of works, Central Victorian Biolinks. Sophie, you've heard what Mary's just described in terms of what they're doing up in KDW. Any similarities or differences in terms of what you've heard from Mary just now, and any thoughts from yourself on why those differences may or may not exist?
Yeah, interesting hearing about Mary talk about the start of the project and not really knowing where these species were in that region. And we're in a similar position, really. So we've been trying to stimulate a lot of citizen science work to determine population or just determine distributions and in the region. And there's a great appetite for that. So it's a matter of trying to support the groups that are interested around the Broadford region, over in the Strathbogies region, and even in the Wombat Forest, Macedon region, to do more. Having said that, some of those groups are galloping along on their own and developing amazing, citizen science projects in their own right. But I guess there's a lot more to do in this region, and we are trying to support, citizen science projects that can provide the information we need to then start working out what we really need to do in those landscapes to secure these populations in the long term. So I just stressing that all importance of actually working out where these things are, and also using the citizen science projects to broaden the broader community's awareness of the creatures and bring them in. And so that's something that we're certainly working on here too, that I think, that Mary's done a lot of in KTW. And we see that as being really foundational to building a long-term program. We've got to know where they are. We've got to engage the broader community. So we have been investing a lot in supporting the development of these citizen science projects across this larger region with the various groups.
Okay, thanks, Sophie. Just a quick clarifier from Cassie Thompson. What sort of activities are the citizen scientists actually undertaking?
So nest box monitoring, establishing wildlife trapping cameras on private land and on roadsides. And then in the Wombat Forest, which, we've got Gail Osborne, who's been, doing greater glider spotlighting for many years. So a variety of things, and the Strathbogies, obviously the Strathbogie CMN and the Strathbogie Forest, sort of a group that have got together who did all that amazing work in the Strathbogie Forest, spotlighting and identifying significant greater glider populations up there. So a variety of approaches, yeah.
And all helping to get a better understanding as to how gliders are using the landscape and what the needs and the opportunities are moving forward. Right. So thank you for that, Sophie. Dave, you were talking about a number of different activities a little earlier that have been ongoing, including a variety of projects with University of Wollongong and others. Would you like to talk a little bit more about what you've been doing in terms of the citizen science, but also a little bit more about how you're engaging with other partners and how you see the monitoring and survey as a means of engaging with community as well as with other partner organisations?
Wow, okay. So as I said, there's been 2 science papers conducted on greater gliders at 7 Mile Beach, and there's currently PhD work on nest boxes with that population at 7 Mile Beach. They're an isolated population, and just to give people context, the other nearest recorded greater gliders to 7 Mile Beach occur probably about 15 or more kilometres further to the northwest just under the escarpment of Barren Grounds Nature Reserve, some of which is on private land. So there's quite some distance between that isolated population and other gliders. And so it's really important that we get connectivity to existing patches of forest that would be suitable for those gliders. And I'm not sure if we know all of the information about, what constitutes good habitat for those gliders yet. There's probably still a bit of work that needs to be done there. And we're currently about to install a number of nest boxes for greater gliders, rear entry nest boxes. So I imagine some of those will go where the current population is at 7 Mile Beach, and the rest of them will go on private lands nearby within easy reach for the gliders. I think the big issue for that population is that we have a road that dissects on the western edge of that population. I think it's still possible for those gliders to traverse across the road, like to actually glide across the road in some places. But council did some road clearing and widened the road, which meant some of those trees were cleared or trimmed, and they weren't aware. Well, actually, they cut down a large blackbutt tree, which was a great issue for local community. Raised a lot of concerns and got a bit of publicity and whatnot, a bit of promotion. So habitat requirements, we also have been looking at places like Beach Road, which has a number of old trees, some of which have hollows in them. And we're looking to work with, through our Bush Connect project, we're looking to work with landholders to protect existing patches of bush and also to plant trees. So we're also working with National Parks and Wildlife Service to put in a tree corridor around the edge of Coomanderi Swamp for the greater gliders, and any other opportunities we can with local landholders to connect up patches of bush for that isolated population. The other thing that has been mentioned in some of the work by Vincent et al. was that rope bridges and poles, glider poles, could also be looked at. And I think there's probably some more work that could be done scientifically wise to investigate the success of rope bridges, particularly for the Duroa Road, where that population is, so we can get gliders across the road easily. And poles and so forth, and also continuing work on nest boxes, perhaps also in relation to the vegetation requirements of the gliders in this area. I understand David Lindemeyer's keynote address mentioned that they'd had a 20-year study on some nest boxes without greater gliders using them, but I know that there's been some work done by Greening Australia in the Strzelecki Ranges where they had greater gliders taking up nest boxes within a matter of a few days. So they will use nest boxes in some places, but not in others. And I guess we don't know why yet, but we need more work on that.
Excellent, absolutely. So look, just on that, and we can tease this out with some of the other participants. A question from Tandy: what do you each see as the most critical conservation needs for the gliders in your regions? So we might go back to Sue up there in Queensland, noting that Theresa Eyre this morning did mention that circumstances in Queensland are a bit different to further south. But your thoughts, Sue, in terms of what those critical conservation needs are for gliders in your region?
Well, I can't speak for other areas of Queensland, but in our area, I think that habitat loss is probably one of the greater threats. Even though we don't have so much logging and land clearing anymore, we still have a very fragmented landscape, and particularly on the coastal area of the Sunshine Coast, there's a lot of habitat loss. We've just had a huge widening redevelopment of the Sunshine, the Bruce Highway, which, knocked out huge amounts of old trees with hollows, and not only gliders, but many species sort of lost their homes there. And so that, I think, would be the main one. And that's what we mostly work towards, just going on to the nest boxes and providing some sort of temporary habitat where we don't have those old trees with the big hollows in them. We have trialled some wheelie bin nest boxes, and thinking of the cockatoos and the large owls, but possibly also the greater gliders. So far that it hasn't been successful, but we're looking into how that can be improved and see if that we can make that a successful thing, because they're cheap, easily built, and not too hard to get up into a tree. But it's not much good having a nest box up in a tree if there's nothing else around for the gliders in terms of habitat. Yeah, so that would be our main thing.
Certainly.
Yep.
And Mary, any thoughts or observations from yourself in terms of particular conservation issues or needs for gliders in your region?
Well, yes, I guess, I mean, I think protecting the good habitat that we've got is like the most important thing that we need to do. We have also trialled nest boxes. Our main target for nest boxes has been squirrel glider, but we did put in some boxes for greater gliders, and we did get greater gliders in our boxes. And I'm looking forward to getting back to see those boxes. They were, fire came all the way around them, so but they weren't burnt. But we haven't been able to get back there because then the floods came and the roads got washed out and whatever. So it'll be interesting to see how they fared. But yeah, I guess, you know, I mean, as I mentioned before, with our area, there was, you know, very little data, but also very little awareness. So it's really taken 5 years, you know, so, and there's still a lot of awareness raising to do. I mean, people don't really know much about gliders in our landscape. And, you know, that, I guess, when people don't know about them, they don't care about them. And yeah, they're not acting to protect them. So I guess, yeah, getting a much more awareness raising out there. I mean, other things, you know, the barbed wire, that's going to be, we're really wanting to run a big campaign against barb. So that's going to be another something else. But yeah, I think that's probably protecting the good habitat that we've got is probably key.
Fantastic. Okay, we've got several other questions that have been coming in during the course of that, and I see that people are starting to answer each other's questions through the chat box, which is fantastic. Just heading back down across the border again into Victoria, Sophie, somebody's raised the question about any particular benefits that you see in uploading glider survey reports to the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas. I'll pose this question of yourself, but then open it to the others as well. Is there much work going on in Central Victoria at the moment, actively encouraging people to upload glider sightings into the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas or other similar online platforms?
Well, it's been very important to, I guess, raise the awareness of important populations that were probably a bit off the radar. That is citizen science survey, uploading those records, registering them with the government. And so we have important habitat that's been identified in the wombat forest, but then there was a VAC inquiry and recommendations for it to receive greater protections. And so looking back to your previous question, what the most important conservation actions are, we've got really significant populations in this part of the world that aren't properly protected. And citizen science and using the VBA as a channel to log that important information that's collected on where these creatures are is certainly being used over here, and great effect. We just need the government to move on, do their part now and secure some of these areas. Yeah, I think there's more could be done to support the community to properly register the important information they collect, and that's a role that Biolinks Alliance hopes to play when we support communities to design and develop their citizen science projects so that the information they collect can be put to effect. But yeah, something that's very much on our radar, and we hope to, we aim to support more of.
Excellent, excellent. I'm conscious that we've got about a little over 7 minutes left and a few more questions starting to pop up. But I think I'll just go quickly once around the table, if I may, people having heard a little bit about the types of work that you're all involved in. Maybe if you could just share with the group, what's been the one key lesson that you've learned in relation to your Glideways projects over the last however many years that you've been operating them? One quick key lesson that that you'd encourage people to take home as a take-home message from today's this session. And I might start again with David, if I may.
Thanks, Gary. So, gee, I'm not sure that there's any one particular reason that jumps out as the highest priority. There's probably a range of things that need to really happen. One of which, of course, is greater recognition for the gliders that are under threat, not only just with the community, but also with local councils and with planning departments at local and state government level. So that also needs, I think, you know, a greater presence or a greater community presence of the issues facing our threatened species, and the greater glider at 7 Mile Beach is a good example. That's our flagship species for a number of other species that we're working on in the region. So we really want to raise the profile through a lot of media coverage, social media, traditional media, and all that sort of stuff, so that the local community really gets behind it as well and pushes, you know, from local council upwards for some change, particularly from a planning point of view.
Fantastic, thanks, Dave. Back over the range to Mary. What would be one key thing that you've learned, or one key lesson learned over the last 5 years that you've been involved in delivering Glideways glider conservation projects?
Just the importance of, you know, that, you know, we're working on a lot on private land, and getting involved with, you know, things like Land for Wildlife, and having, you know, people be able to go out and give landholders some advice on their habitat and help them to understand how important their little pieces of habitat are, and trying to get those protected. I think, yeah, I'd say that's probably just about sort of protecting what we've got.
Fantastic, thanks, Mary. Sue, your own reflections on a key lesson learned?
Well, I'm a bit like David. I can't think of one lesson except how important education is and engagement with the community, and that's where we've really had good success in working with private landholders. We just, you know, can't get roving restorers out to landholders often enough, and Susie frequently goes out to advise landholders about how to go about restoration on their land. And just to answer one question about corridors of importance, one of the things with that big national park is relation to climate change and allowing animals to move from the lower altitudes up into that higher altitude as the temperatures warm and things dry out, and moving into areas of really good habitat. That's important. And, you know, any improved habitat is a benefit. I think that's one of my little mottos.
Fantastic. And then back down to the other end of the Great Eastern Ranges to you again, Sophie. Aside from don't take on too many two-day symposium organisation tasks, any other key lessons ever again? I think you said that after the first one, and that was just a one-dayer. So yes. Hats off to you. But
look,
yeah,
look, we've done it again because I think it stresses something about how important the research and science is, and how important it is to get that research and science to the right people in the right form. There are a lot of people out in the community out there who do want to do more, but it's about assisting them to do the right thing in the right place. And so that's why we put ourselves through these knots and torture running these online symposiums for so many people, because there is an appetite in the community to do more. But as I said, it's, you know, it does need support. I guess we have to work in partnership as we go forward. And I think what I've learned is just the potential to do more that the right partnerships can actually realise. You know, getting the right people together, bringing in the science, bringing in the engagement, bringing in the key landholders. I think there's a lot of, you know, to be optimistic about that. If we can actually crack how to work in this more collaborative way, that we can really do a lot more. And I think that we're learning that the gliders are a tremendous icon species to focus these sort of ambitious collaborations around.
Absolutely. And it's certainly been an experience of the Great Eastern Range Initiative working within landscape partnerships, but also bringing multiple landscape partnerships together is really vital for a program like Glideways.
Yeah.
And your last comment and observation to some extent also flags to me the issue of the importance of when you've stimulated interest and enthusiasm for people, to be able to give guidance on whereabouts they can best channel their efforts, their resources to best effect. So we've had a question from Tony asking whether the Glideways project has identified high priority corridors for effort across various regions. He mentioned Southeast Queensland, as Sue had touched on, but also I think it's a critical need across the Great Eastern Ranges more widely. So during the course of 2021 in particular, Great Eastern Ranges Initiative is looking towards developing our national Glideways plan to highlight what are the key priorities for Great Eastern Ranges as an organisation to support community-based organisations, landscape consortia and the like, to undertake glider conservation work. And as part of that, working with various partners to identify those local known corridors at a local scale, but also to identify in landscapes where people may not have been particularly active, identifying within those landscapes whereabouts we might be focusing into the future. We're coming up on the hour right now, so we won't go too far into too many questions. I would just like to pass the question though around the four panelists today. Is there a particular comment or burning issue that you really wanted to get across before we close in a moment or two's time? Okay, sounds like we're all comfortable. So look, everybody, we're coming up on the hour mark. I don't want to delay you, but I just want to again say, firstly, thank you to Sophie, Mary, David, and Sue for your participation, your insights, and also your leadership in the projects that you're involved in and with the communities and the networks that you're helping to support. But also Central Victorian Biolinks for the opportunity to be able to have this two-day symposium, still only halfway through, at the halfway mark now. Really looking forward to tomorrow's program and hearing more of a focus on squirrel gliders. And of course, thank you to all of you participants who tuned into this session and for the many great questions that people have raised. I'm seeing that they're still coming flooding in, so thank you very much for the engagement. And with that, Sasha, I might hand back to you to close us out, if you would, please.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gary. I think everyone will agree that was a really fantastic session. So yeah, I think we'll close it off there. Thank you for all participating and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you very much.